Okay, we're live. So this is I believe this is the second Creation Care adult forum. Did anyone else go to the first one? Okay. Is anyone on the Creation Care team? All right. So I was asked to talk about, it's not going to be what was in the bulletin, unfortunately. So it will be somewhat about pollution, but it's more about lake health. There's many different divisions within the DNR. I work with the section of fisheries, and so we're going to talk a lot about fish and aquatic or water resources. I'm going to kind of go quickly over some of the stuff that we do, and then just talk about, it'll be kind of about pollution, but it's more about development and that type of stuff. So yes, I work for the DNR. My technical title is the Area Fisheries Supervisor within the Detroit Lakes office here in town. And we are out by Dutton Locks, Lake Sally, so we have the fish hatchery and all that stuff. If you're out there in the spring, which about a month and a half, we'll be starting to gear up to do that type of stuff. So that's probably what we're most well known for is our hatchery. Even though we do a lot more, so hopefully we'll get into that. And it's a small group, and so by no means is it going to be a super formal thing. If you've got questions or whatever, or you want to talk about something that I'm not going to take up the whole time. So feel free to chime in and we can really talk about anything, and I will try to share as much as I know. I don't do all parts of the DNR, but I know a decent amount of what's going on, so feel free to chime in. So as everybody is probably well aware, we are very blessed with the aquatic resources that we have, not only in Minnesota, but especially in the Detroit Lakes area and the Lakes area in general. And it's probably a better way to kind of give you an idea of how blessed we are if you compare it to where I grew up, which was in central South Dakota, that little circle here. And if we zoom in even more, it's pretty barren for aquatics. So I grew up in this little town called Gettysburg, and when my dad and I wanted to go fishing, we really had only a few options. We could go maybe to Cottonwood over here, or there's this little lake, Potsdam, there's little Lake Hurley over here. And if you had a good enough boat or enough resources at your disposal, you can do a lot of recreation on the Missouri River on Lake Oahe. However, it is huge, and so you needed to have the right type of equipment. And so we never really had that size of boat. So either we were shore fishing there, or we were trying to fish on some of these other small bodies of water. So just a great comparison. It's, if I ever go back there, options are very limited. So when you're going fishing, you don't have much time. You got to go where you can. When we're here, it actually is like, well, geez, where are you going to go? Like, where are you going to catch? And there's just so many decisions you have to make. Now, if we bring it back to here, our fisheries management area is 6 counties. And so Detroit Lakes is down here. We're at the southern end of our management area. So worst case scenario, when we're trying to get up in this neck of the woods, it's about 2 hours. Most of our water bodies and lakes and things are down in Becker and Mahnomen. But we do have a suite of lakes up here in Polk County that occupies some of our time. And we also are responsible for a section of the Red River. The other offices in Fergus Falls and Baudette, they have the other parts of the Red. There's just no way that we could cover the whole thing. So that's kind of the idea of how big our area is. And so we have several fisheries offices. Like I said, we've got one in Fergus, we've got one in Park Rapids. Each one has its suite of counties and things that they manage as well. So what do we do? So again, we're just talking about the section of fisheries here. A big part of what we do is monitor. And when I was putting this presentation together, I came across all these old photos, and I thought it was kind of neat to throw them in, especially this dude in his little hat and his shorts and stuff. This totally would not be allowed now just because he's not wearing a life jacket. So probably should have thrown that in there, but still. So we do a ton of monitoring, and it could be just this gentleman here is taking a zooplankton sample, so there's little tiny microorganisms in the water, and he's catching them with this little net. We also have large nets that we use to catch. This is a muskie net, so to catch large muskies, we use bigger nets. Down in this picture here, this is called electrofishing, and it's basically exactly what it sounds like. We're applying electrical current to the water. It stuns the fish. They come up to the top. We net them, and then we can measure them or do whatever we want. This individual maps plants, or is doing some plant mapping. And then we also have, we do surveys of anglers. So recently, like this last summer on Detroit Lake, we call it a creel survey. So basically we're just wondering what are people catching and how many fish are they keeping and that type of stuff. And it just helps guide our management of the water body. So we do a lot of monitoring of all sorts of different parts of the aquatic or the water environment. The big part that probably takes up, well, this is really what my staff do all summer long, and it's called a standard lake survey. So within our area, we have 130 lakes or so that we're responsible for. And so in order to kind of keep tabs on what's going on in those lakes, we have these standard lake surveys. And so a lake, we have a schedule, and some lakes are surveyed every 3 years, some every 5. The smaller bodies of water, we may only get to those every 10 years. So the ones that are kind of on just a cruise control, or there's really not much management that we're doing, we may only get to those every 10 years. And really what we're trying to do is go there and just see what are the fish populations doing. In order to do that, we use a suite of gill nets, trap nets, and or electrofishing. So this is a gill net. Gill nets, if anyone's not aware, are kind of open water nets. We're really targeting walleyes, northern pike, yellow perch, those kind of torpedo-shaped fish. And it just sits down in the bottom of the water, kind of in the open area of the lake. And as fish swim by, they get caught in the net. Unfortunately, they are dead, but we still get a lot of information from those fish about what's going on. Trap nets are a whole nother beast. They're more for those shoreline-oriented fish species. And so this is a trap net. We stake it to the shore, we pull it out backwards, and as these shoreline fish kind of swim along, they hit the lead, and then they fall into the trap. And so those are more for our bluegills, black crappies, bass to some extent, but bass are really hard to net. They actually they call it net shy, so they actually can kind of see the net and avoid it. And that's when electrofishing comes into play. If you really want to know what you're doing with your bass, electrofishing is probably your best method to try to catch those fish. And this picture here just shows we use tubs. We empty the trap nets into the tub, so that's just an idea of how many fish we see just in one net. So, but all of this, using all these nets and tools, they give us an idea of what the fish abundance is like, what size of the fish there are, how fast they're growing. And so we do the same net, we use the same net locations at the same time of year. And so what that allows us to do is to kind of get a gauge to see what the fish population is like. It's not necessarily, the nets aren't really telling us that there's 100 bluegills out there. It's more about how does the abundance of bluegills this year compare to like 5 years ago or something. So when you use all this data, and if you do it pretty consistently from using the same net location at the same time of year,
you use the same type of nets then?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So you can really start to build a pretty big data set. So for almost all of our lakes, we have these kind of graphs or this kind of data, and it's going all the way back to the 50s. And so this is basically the number of bluegills per trap net through time. So the last time on this lake that we surveyed was 2018. And so really what you're looking at is sort of like trend analysis, like kind of what's going on. So you can see that, somewhere in the mid-90s was, a very abundant bluegill population, especially compared to the 50s and the 70s when there really just weren't that many. This gray area here is basically representing, if you compare this lake to all of the lakes in the state of Minnesota that are like this lake, that have the same shoreline characteristics, the same depth, that type of stuff, how is this lake? And so when we were here, we were much higher than what a normal lake in Minnesota that has those same characteristics. And then we throw this dotted line on this graph, and that is to represent the lake's average. So given all the data that we have, how is this lake comparing to its average? And so the last time we surveyed in 2018, we were above the lake average in abundance for bluegill. And so if you take it a step further and you look at all the species in the lake, then you really can get a good idea of kind of trends and what kind of things are going on. So walleye is the state fish. Everybody wants to know what walleyes are doing in lakes. And so on this particular lake, you can see we've had a pretty steady decline in the walleye population, especially when you compare it to the early into the mid-90s, as you can see kind of in this graph. So on the other side, you can kind of see northern pike have crept up, and another thing is yellow perch abundance has really declined. So you kind of start to see like how things are ebbing and flowing, and we can use this information to determine if we need to do other sort of management or something on this lake. So usually, if we're really busy on a summer, I will have 2 crews on 2 different lakes each week, starting from June all the way through the middle of August or so. So they're pretty much just out there every day netting fish and measuring and weighing and dealing with fish. Some other things that we do, especially when we're looking at lake health and aquatic environment health, is what we call Index of a Biotic Integrity Survey, or an IBI survey. And so the standard lake surveys really are geared towards those larger fish species. But there's all these other sorts of minnows and darters and things like that that we just don't get in those other nets. And so we employ some small backpack electrofishing as well as sanding to try to catch these little minnows. And then we take whatever fish that we get during this survey as well as the standard survey, and we develop a lake list. Like, here's all the fish you caught in that lake. And so every lake should have a certain species in it if it's going to be healthy. And so these surveys really tell us, are we finding the fish that we're supposed to be finding, or are we not finding those fish? And so it's really giving us an idea of is there something going on possibly in that water body that we should start looking at? So and it gives you like this score, so there's a threshold of the score, and if you're above it, then you're great, you're really healthy. If you're below it, then you're called impaired. And so then we start asking questions of why might it be impaired? And so to help answer whether or not something is impaired, we go and we start mapping emergent vegetation. So when I say emergent, that's vegetation that's above the lake's, the water surface. So like bulrushes, cattails, wild rice, that type of stuff. And when we do these surveys, if we're seeing an issue with the fish, if we're seeing that our IBI score or our fish diversity is not where we want to, then we can say, well, maybe it's just because we don't have as much emergent vegetation as we once did, or something like that. So it's another piece of the puzzle. And then we also will run around and score the shore surveys. And those are basically, we randomly pick points around the lake shoreline, and staff would navigate to that point, and then they would just look towards the shoreline and determine whether it's developed or not, and then how much development is there. Have they totally gotten rid of all the plants? Is their lawn completely mowed to the lake edge? Have they cut down all the trees? That type of stuff. And so on this thing, every red dot is developed shoreline, and the yellow dots are non-developed sites. So as we do this over years, we can see whether a lake is becoming more developed, and we could also compare that to an IBI score to see if we are starting to see less fish species there. And then you can start kind of drawing conclusions from that type of information. So again, like, how is all this stuff used? Really, it's used, if you're looking at standard surveys, we're using it for managing fish populations. Every lake has a lake management plan that kind of guides what we're trying to do, what we're going to stock, if we're going to use any regulations, any of that type of stuff, or do nothing. There's a lot of lakes that we just survey just to make sure that it's still fun. So there is a lot of do nothing lakes there. When you start looking at IBI scores, score the shore, and these emergent maps, emergent plant mapping, then we start looking at how do we manage shoreline and watershed development. And the DNR is not, like this big giant sole entity that has all powerful regulation. A lot of the shoreline and the watershed development is really other local units of government, like your counties or watershed districts. And so if we're seeing issues with fish populations, a lot of times we have to work with those other local units of government in order to see if there's additional regulations, or if there's some other tool or something that we can use to try to limit the amount of development that's happening in our lake. And so I have this question mark of additional regulations. No one wants to talk about regulations, but sometimes that's the only way that you can kind of help move the needle a little bit. And so when we talk about regulations, as I was saying, the DNR is not all powerful. And so just to make sure everybody's aware that the DNR has certain jurisdictions and the county has their own jurisdictions. And the big cutoff there on a lake is the ordinary high water level. And so on this example, the ordinary high water level is somewhere here. Usually it's kind of hard to determine. It is an elevation, and so a lot of times you need to get a survey crew out there to give you the true ordinary high water mark. Sometimes if you walk, you can kind of walk and feel where it starts to, drop and then even out, and somewhere in that area is the ordinary high water mark. But if you're really going to be doing something serious, you should probably have it determined by some surveyor. And so if you're looking towards the lake, that's where the DNR has jurisdiction. And if you're looking up into the upland area or the from the lake edge, lakeward or shoreward, landward, that's where the county has jurisdiction. And so some typical things that we run into is if you're trying to do ice ridge removal, which is basically like the ice has pushed a big ridge up here and you want to try to kind of flatten that out, that would be us. If you want to put riprap down in here, that would be us. Sand blankets, again, that would be us. If you're going to excavate or fill, which is usually you're not allowed, but that would be, you'd be talking to us. If you have a dock that's of a certain size, that's another DNR jurisdictional thing. And then vegetation removal, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. So if you don't like weeds or any of that stuff, then you're dealing with us, and that's especially a fisheries permit that we'll be discussing here.
What's a sand blanket? Is that just
sand blanket? Is like I want a sand beach, and so I'm bringing a truckload of sand in. Yeah. But if you have a lake place or whatever, and you want to modify that structure, or you want to make a new, like put up a new garage or a shed, that's all county. That's county shoreland ordinances that they do. They do consult the DNR, but for the most part, that is all the county's own regulations, and they have staff and stuff to deal with that. And so you probably have heard, like, Ottertail County is really liberal, and they let you do X, Y, and Z, but Becker County, they don't let you do any, so that's why, because every county has its own shoreline ordinance that governs what you can and cannot do on the shoreline. So, but let's talk about vegetation removal, because this affects fish habitat. This is actually something that fisheries deals with all the time, and I hope it kind of gives you a better appreciation for vegetation. And so again, like we talked about, here, Brennan, this is you. Here you go. So again, like we talked about, we have a very diverse amount of lakes and rivers, and they're all valuable either for ecological reasons or even economic, especially when you're talking about Detroit lakes here and how many people come here or come to resorts just to recreate on our waters. But the big thing to point out is that the health of your lake or river is really a reflection of what the shoreline is like or what your watershed is like. So you have to keep that in mind. And for fish, they require all sorts of different types of habitat. And just to make sure everybody understands, when I say habitat, it's the region where a plant or an animal naturally lives. And fish are kind of unique in that they have many different types of habitat needs. It varies from when they are first born until they're adults. So this northern pike that's hiding in the plants here, he may not have needed that type of habitat when it was first born. Maybe it wanted to be in the open water feeding on zooplankton or something. So, and so where we really see the interaction is with humans is the aquatic plants or the weeds, and how people don't want to be touched in the legs by weeds or anything like that. But those are important habitat things for fish, and not just fish, but for ducks and other plants and other animals and birds and stuff.
So is that why fish can get stunted then in some lakes? Is because they don't have?
Sometimes if you have too abundant habitat, then predators can't get at those fish, and so you're not getting adequate predator pressure on there to regulate their populations. It's a possibility, but I think it's rare that we ever find a lake that has, too few. It's got too many plants. But a lot of times it is a thing too of anglers just can't. There's so many plants I can't even fish. We hear that a lot too. But there are, we do recognize there are shoreline property rights. You do have rights as a shoreline property owner. Those rights include to have a dock to navigable water, to take water, and so when you're driving around the lake and you see all these sprinklers, they're just sucking water out of the lake, you have that right to do that. They also have the right to fish, boat, hunt, and swim. And so there's there's all sorts of laws and rules that guide what we allow people to do with aquatic plants. I'm not going to get into all those details, but there are basically it all relies or goes back to these property owner rights. So most of the time, someone comes to us and says, "The plants are so thick, I can't fish, or I can't swim, or I can't get my boat off the dock." That's when we would come and evaluate what you have, and then determine what's a reasonable amount of plant control that you can do. So, but I just want to make sure that we are aware of the benefits of aquatic plants. There are benefits. For sure, fish and wildlife habitat. That's the number one thing, is that there are habitat for fish and for birds and other animals. It's important to note that plants do help filter nutrients and improve water clarity. So we found that aquatic plants, instead of all of the productivity going to algae blooms, a lot of times those plants will take up that nutrients and actually reduce algae blooms and increase water clarity. As well as stabilize sediments along shoreline and help reduce erosion. Those are important things too. But if you look at the economical side, there have been studies that have shown that if you have clear water, your property values are higher. And since aquatic plants kind of help improve water clarity, those things go hand in hand. And there's also this inverse relationship between property values and the amount of development on the lake. So there's a certain threshold at which you have too much development and your property values start to go down. So those are all good reasons just to keep in mind as we go along. So what if we don't protect aquatic plants? What if we just let things run amok and people just do what they want? Do you remember the IBI score that I was talking about before? So if we look at some of the data that we have, this is that IBI score, the Fish Diversity Index. And we found that as you get to about 16 docks per mile around the lake, your IBI score really starts to decline. So that's pretty good knowledge to have, that lake development can have an impact on what your fish population looks like. If we look just at certain species, this is yellow perch abundance, and so this is a weird index of abundance of yellow perch in a lake. And so again, as you increase the number of docks that you have around your lakeshore, your yellow perch numbers start to decline. And a lot of reasons why is because as you get more development and as people start removing, like trees and other things that perch need to lay their eggs on, there's just less places for them to lay eggs, and they just have a reduced abundance. So a lot of times we hear, well, it's just me. It's just me. I just want to, I'm just one person that's just having an issue, but it is collective. You're not the only one that's dealing with aquatic plants. And so you can see on these photos, this is a weed roller, and this person actually, you're not allowed to move your weed. Once you have a spot for your weed roller, that's where it stays. This person was actually moving the weed roller further and further in different spots. You can actually see that. And so this guy has a weed roller, this person has a weed roller, this one's doing a weed roller. So it just keeps, getting continuously more and more plants are being removed as you increase that development. And just kind of further illustrate that, so this is a lake in Polk County. This was in 1991, so just remember this picture. I'm going to kind of flip back and forth to kind of give you an idea. So this is 91, and then 20 years later, it looks like this. So a lot of the trees have been removed, especially for some of these lots. This person here, this family, is actually just cutting right through that. I'm assuming it's either cattails or water lilies or something that they're going through. Even down here, this is all developed now. They got a big driveway coming down to their garage or boathouse. And again, that's where it starts to come into that impervious surface. So if anyone's ever had to deal with the county doing shoreline stuff, they have a certain percentage of impervious surface that you're allowed to have. And that's why they have that, is because otherwise this person might have a ginormous driveway or something like that, and then all that water, whenever it rains, would just go right into the lake. So as you decrease the amount of impervious surface that you have, it's just faster for that runoff to go into your lake, which carries all sorts of different salts or pollution or gasoline, oils, whatever is on the road. And so when we're doing a lot of our aquatic plant permits and stuff, we know that we are dealing with this balance between resource protection as well as your shoreline property owner rights. And we're getting pulled from all sides because we have, of course, the people that own the property and they want to do something, but we also have all these other groups that recreate on the lake. And, you know, they want it to, hopefully the water quality to stay high and good. And so we're always balancing those two things all the time. And so how can you help? So this is kind of geared towards, you know, if you're buying a lake property or you're going to be doing lake property, but it's just good to know in case everybody kind of knows people that have lake property. You know, Mackenzie and I have family that have lake shoreline properties, and so I try to stay out of it. I'll try to educate if they ask. But the number one thing, the first thing that I see is people that call my office and they're like, oh, I got this great deal on this shoreline. Like, let's say, I don't know if anyone's familiar with like Johnson Lake here in town. So a lot of the really great shoreline property has already been developed and everything. So now they're moving to these other, let's say like a tier 2 kind of lake where it's a cool lake, but it's not a big Cormorant or it's not a Detroit, you know, it's kind of a shallow lake. And so I get a phone call, oh, I got this great deal on this property on Johnson Lake. And I just want to know what I can do with these plants. And so I'm like, well, there's only a certain amount you can do. And I ask them, what do you want to do? Like, what do you want to, because some people do want that natural environment type lake where they just go and kayak and they see all sorts of stuff and they could care less whether they do that much development on it. They just want a small dock so they can get their kayak in and do whatever. But then these people, some other people have in their mind, they're going to be out there with their wakeboard boat and they're going to be pontooning and it's like, it's just not going to happen. It's like a 15-foot deep lake, you know, and there's probably bulrushes all over in that lake. And so I try to boat around that. And so I try to tell them to look at aerial photos. You can see a lot of aerial photos of anyone. You can actually see bogs that float around, these big giant mats of cattails. And on Google Earth, you can go back in time and stuff and just watch how this bog like moves around the lake. And so I say, you're going to be dealing with cattails all the time, you know, and so likely cattails mean a very mucky type of soft bottom. And that's what that lake's going to be. You cannot take a lake like Johnson and make it into a hard bottom lake like Big Cormorant or something like that. So that's what I mean when I talk about buy smart. It's like if you expect a nice sandy beach, hard bottom, you're not looking at a lake like Johnson. You're looking at a lake, you're going to have to pay the extra money and find something else that's going to meet those because you can't make a lake into what you want it to be. And that kind of goes in line with be honest with yourself. I have a friend that has a lake place, and when he bought it, he had, I don't know, it must have been 50 feet at least of a nice sand area that the previous owners have developed. And in the meantime, since he's been there, he's really only found that he's using maybe like 20 or 15 feet of the sand. That's where all the kids kind of recreate, and everything else is kind of just kind of growing up. And so his family's like, oh, look at all that beach you can do. And he's like, I don't want to maintain all that beach and everything. I just, you know, this is what we use, and so this is what we do. And so that's where I try to let people be honest with, do you really need 150 feet of beach? You know, like, can you let some of that be native and just let it do its thing? You know, try to be, there's going to help you in cost and as well as labor, trying to be honest with how much you're really going to use. The other thing is to only control plants where necessary. And that's really where we, like if you come to us and you need to get a permit from us to do something, that's where we try to really have an honest conversation with you. It's like, what can we really get by with that you really need? And so some examples of that is, you know, this was in 2011 on this certain lake. Everybody's got their big giant dock. I'm assuming this is probably wild rice or cattails or something. I'm thinking it might be wild rice. Either way, it's an emergent plant. Hopefully that when these people bought this property, they had seen that this is what it's going to look like in the summer. You know, we do have some people that look at property in the spring and they're like, this is great. And then summer rolls by and that's when the plants start to grow and then this is what you have. So anyway, they've been obviously getting by with all these different docks. They've got their lanes and everything to get to where they need to be. Fast forward 2 years, and so these arrows will kind of show you some of the changes that we see. So in 2 years,
How big do you think that is?
I don't know. I have no idea. But in 2 years, for some reason, they decided they need to get to here, you know, for some reason. I don't know why. I don't know if they were doing something else. They've reduced the length of this dock, you know, to here, and so now they're controlling more plants there. So, again, it's just being honest with yourself and determining, do I really need to make a whole nother path? Again, that costs money and time to try to make that path, and this is likely going to be like mowing the lawn a lot of these times, because these plants just continue to grow, and so you're constantly having to keep that channel open. Talk with local government, you know, talk with us, the DNR. I'm glad that people call us and say, hey, what do you think of this lake property? Because we can actually talk honestly about what some of what they're going to have to deal with. But if they're looking at, you know, trying to make a new garage or something, they do have to talk to the county, because they are the authority on what kind of shoreline ordinances and stuff that they have and what you can and cannot do. And the sooner that you talk to us, then the less chance that you run into some issue where you have to do you actually have to return it to the previous condition. So that's it. That's all I have. So I'm on my soapbox. I'm done. I'm sure there's plenty of questions. I wanted to have plenty of time for questions. We probably got at least 15 minutes. You know, so.
Nathan, do you deal much with lake associations?
Oh yeah. Yep. All the time.
Are they run the scale too, from we want economic development to we want preservation?
Yes. And so a lot of times they're probably more on, I've got my lake place now, so I don't want any more development on this lake. And so, you know, they do have, some of them have, you know, realistic goals, and others have, you know, very unrealistic goals that they don't want to see anywhere on that.
The reason they're calling you is so that they can get their data to beat up on your neighbors?
Yep. We do get a lot of that, of like my neighbors, you know, their dock is crossing over into my property, and so a lot of times the only thing we can do is say, you gotta, you know, we'd rather not come in and say, we the DNR, that's what they want. They want us to come to, we the DNR says you can't do that, you know, and more of it's a civil matter that you should be able to work out with your neighbor. So, but we do want their input, especially when we're doing fish management regulations or anything like that. We want to know what they're thinking, because a lot of times they do have the most investment in that water body. But we also try to take their input, just like, you know, people in the community's input, or someone that, you know, likes to recreate on that lake too.
I know Harvard County had different classes of lakes, environmental.
Yep.
I can't remember the classes.
Yep.
Similar.
We have, yeah, I think that's a statewide. So there's like recreational development, general development, and natural environment sort of lakes. So, and as we've seen people look to these natural environment lakes, you know, because everything, all this other stuff is kind of developed, we've tried to work with Becker County and other counties to just think that you have a chance to try to maybe increase your lot size so you don't have as much fragmentation of that habitat. But of course, the county is thinking of property taxes, you know, so the fewer lots they have, they don't get the same tax base, you know, so they're judging, it's all sort of comes down to economics at that standpoint.
You guys deal any with pharmaceutical waste and tracking and monitoring that? Or
No,
is
that would be,
somewhere else?
that's PCA. So we're truly talking about water quality, or, I mean, we track water quality and we keep a monitor of it, but MPCA the Pollution Control Agency has the jurisdiction for water quality stuff.
Are you seeing that it's getting worse?
We've documented, I worked with an individual that was doing a master's degree down in St. Paul and Minneapolis, and was actually pulling water samples and fish samples from below the water treatment plant there, and they were noticing that fish were becoming either more males or more female. I can't remember which way it was, and it basically was because of the pharmaceutical waste below those water treatment plants. And so, and I don't think that it's gotten any better, especially as we've pumped more and more
Well, and
into
the
the system.
chemicals that people are putting in there and stuff.
Yeah, and so again, we're not the water testers or whatever, but you know, it has the salt is the new hot topic now, how much salt we put on the water. And basically if you go to the metro, there's certain wastewater ponds along the freeway that are basically completely salt water just because of all the salts that are put in there. So, and there's no way to get that out of the lake. And so there's more people looking at nitrate levels in the water itself, because as that becomes more salty, we have freshwater fish, not saltwater fish. And so that affects all aquatic organisms all the way through the food chain.
Invasive species.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't say anything about invasive species. That's another big topic that we deal with. We have watercraft inspectors. The county's got watercraft inspectors now. For us in fisheries, we've been watching a lot with zebra mussels and their impact to the zooplankton. So in the beginning, you saw that guy with that net that he was lowering it down. And so imagine in your water, you've got microscopic plants, and that's who your base of your food chain. And then on top of them are the zooplankton, which are microscopic animals that eat the plants. And then you've got small fish above the zooplankton that eat the zooplankton and continue to grow. And so where we've seen zebra mussels, we've seen that zooplankton community really change, because the zebra mussels are filtering the water and they're taking out all that little plant material, which is less food for the zooplankton. So the zebra mussels are really almost destroying that lower part of the food chain, which impacts possibly the rest of the food chain. And so there's a number of studies going on. The big question for us is, are fish able to switch to another food source and still survive, or what's going to be the long-term impact of zebra mussels on some of our lakes? We've had them now for over 10 years. If you look at Pelican Lake, 2009 is when those were found there. And we still have decent fish populations there. The water is definitely clear because the zebra mussels aren't filtering. And so that's impacted people's ability to catch fish, just because clear water, fish can see better. And so it's hard. You gotta change your habits, so that type of stuff. But it's another big, for fisheries, it's just monitoring those changes and seeing if we're continuing to have issues with the fish populations down the road.
But you also have the Eurasian milfoil.
Yep, so
I think Detroit has.
Story.
Detroit has flowering rush.
Study story.
Flowering rush. I'm
Yep.
sorry.
Yep, flowering rush. So flowering rush is more like an emergent plant. That is probably one of the few, I don't know if I want to say success stories, but the Pelican River Watershed District and we, the DNR, also through grants and stuff, we put a lot of money trying to figure out how flowering rush works. And through that way of figuring out how it works, we were able to figure out a way to control those plants to at least to keep them from becoming at such a nuisance level like they were, in the early 2000s. If you remember the city beach and stuff, having all sorts of flowering rush, little stubs growing up above the surface of the water. And it just took a lot of time and money trying to study the plant and figure out what treatment method works best without killing too many other plants. So that's always the hard part with invasives is you can kill plants. We know how to kill plants. The problem is it's not specific just to milfoil or flowering rush. And so you have to figure out, is the damage worth, are we going to take this really nice, there's little bits of flowering rush in there, but there's also a lot of native plants. And so are we going to completely destroy that just so that we could hopefully keep flowering rush down? That's where it gets tough, because a lot of times what we've seen is the invasive always wins out. So you might get rid of all these native plants and the invasive just keeps going. So those are the hard discussions to have, is what to allow. And what we did with the watershed district was to try to get them to study it and monitor as much as possible to see, are we moving the needle on flowering rush control, or are we just killing native plants and the invasives are just winning? And through all of the work that they did, they were able to find a pretty selective herbicide that they could put out there and try to keep the abundance down. And now I think they're down to only treat in certain areas once a year or maybe every other year. And that's really what you're hoping with invasive plants, is you can never really eradicate them. They're just out there. And the aquatic environment is so different than the terrestrial landscape, because when you're looking out in your lawn, you'll be like, I can see all the dandelions. Well, in a lake, you can't, unless you're going to get a diver that's going to sit there and pinpoint all of them, which is really expensive. There's all this huge unknown of what how many plants are still out there and how much exists. So yeah, there is a lot with invasives that could be a whole nother, that'd be a whole nother topic of discussion. I did do invasive species work prior to coming up here to Detroit Lakes, and so I've got a pretty vast history. Because when I first started, that's when the zebra mussels started hitting western, west central Minnesota, Alexandria, Pelican Lake. So yeah, there's a lot going on with that. Does anybody have or know people that have lakeshore? Yeah. So yeah, I apologize. It's kind of geared towards development and stuff, but it's interesting because what happens on the lakeshore really does impact what we see in the lake. So
What would be interesting though is, we were talking earlier about the things that they do on these potato fields and stuff.
mm-hmm.
And how has that affected the aquatic plants? I mean, because they spray to keep crap away, they spray to kill, they spray to,
And really, what we've seen is mostly or where the most work is done is in the wells, in the groundwater. And I think because of, especially where potatoes are grown and how well they do, that soil is just ripe for those chemicals to leach right into the groundwater pretty quick. So we haven't. I mean, there's always research out there that show how chemicals flow into rivers and lakes and stuff, but at least in that case, it's almost going right through the groundwater. And then maybe you might see that in a trout stream or something as the groundwater interfaces with the trout stream at some point. But I think it's a big deal for Park Rapids. I think they've had to upgrade their water treatment plant just because of increased nitrate levels within those, which is believed to be part of the amount of nitrogen and stuff that they put on its fertilizer. So it's a big deal, and just groundwater abundance. My son is huge into this show called One on Earth, and basically they're taking aerial photos and they say, "What is that thing?" One of the examples they had was in Mexico City, where they have completely sucked all of the water out of the ground, and now it's a big cavern, and so they're having sinkholes and stuff. And meanwhile, so people are like fighting for water. There's water trucks driving around the city to deliver water, but the golf courses are still being watered at the resorts there. So it's just this big, how are you using your resources, And so it's been huge for the DNR lately, getting a better handle on what we're doing with our groundwater, because it is not a finite resource. It takes years for that groundwater to get down there, and you can contaminate it pretty quick if you do the wrong stuff, or you could suck out all the water if you don't watch it. So, any other questions? Good.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.